There are truths so deeply buried in the marrow of reality that most eyes, glazed by the glitter of the surface world, never glimpse them. They exist beneath the polished stage of ordinary life, weaving through the cracks, whispering in forgotten corners of thought, and stirring the soul in silent, urgent longing. It is here, in this shadowed domain, that the dark and hidden secrets of Satan take their root, not merely as a character of myth or fable, but as a living principle coiled around the foundations of existence itself. To speak of Satan is to speak not only of an ancient adversary, a rebel archangel cast into the pit, but of the very architecture of illusion, the architecture of veils that cradle humanity in a prison of mist and half-truths. In every age, stories have been spun about the Prince of Darkness, the great deceiver, the tempter of hearts. Yet beneath the folklore and the fire and brimstone sermons lies a deeper, quieter truth. Satan, as force and symbol, is less about external monstrosity and more about an inward fragmentation, the fracturing of soul from source, the breaking of the mirror that once perfectly reflected the infinite. We were not born into a battlefield of good and evil in the way we are so often told. We were born into a cosmic play, where the grandest struggle is not merely between two armies, but between the luminous memory of what we truly are and the seductive forgetting of it. Satan, then, becomes not merely a being, but an energy, a fractal pattern of distortion running like a dark river through the unseen world. His domain is not only the abyss, but the mind tangled in its own reflections, the heart turned inward like a labyrinth folding endlessly upon itself. It is said that the greatest trick the adversary ever played was convincing the world he did not exist. Yet the even greater trick, the one hidden beneath that, is convincing the soul that it is separate, small, condemned to be lost in a hostile universe. Satan's real secret is not in monstrous rebellion alone, but in the invention of limitation itself. He is the master of counterfeit light, weaving false paths and hollow promises, constructing dazzling towers of knowledge that ascend only into clouds of confusion. His fingerprints are found not in the terrifying obviousness of evil, but in the subtle corruption of good intentions, the erosion of clarity by endless complexity, the sweet poison hidden within noble ambition. Across civilizations, symbols have hinted at this hidden architecture: the serpent eating its own tail, the falling star cast from heaven, the mirror cracking into 1,000 shards. These are not merely decorations of mythology. They are encrypted messages, ancient warnings left in plain sight for those willing to look beyond the glittering masks. Behind the stories of wars in heaven and forbidden fruits lies a singular truth. The corruption of vision, the distortion of knowing, is the true seat of Satan's throne. To expose these secrets is not simply to wage war against a shadow. It is to awaken to the nature of the trap itself. It is to recognize that every whisper of despair, every flicker of false pride, every sensation of separation is a doorway into the machinery of the hidden kingdom. And yet, paradoxically, it is also the pathway to liberation. For only by walking through the labyrinth, seeing each illusion for what it is, and refusing to mistake the reflection for the source, can the soul reclaim its lost inheritance. This journey is not for the faint-hearted. It demands the courage to dismantle beloved illusions, to unearth the skeletons hidden not in otherworldly realms, but in the quiet hollows of one's own being. It asks for a sight that pierces not just the external corruption of the world, but the subtle betrayals that occur within, the betrayals of hope by fear, of truth by convenience, of love by manipulation. In this exploration, Satan will not be treated as merely a villain in some ancient drama, but as a cipher, a living metaphor for the mechanisms of distortion that ripple through the very fabric of existence. To understand these mechanisms is not merely to fight evil in some archaic moral sense. It is to reweave the torn tapestry of the soul, to remember the silent music that once held all things in perfect harmony. Thus, we begin at the edge of a great mystery, one that is neither wholly external nor wholly internal, but somehow both, a mirror upon mirrors, a maze within a maze. We will journey through the ancient stories, the subtle energies, and the hidden betrayals that together form the secret architecture of this force. And in doing so, we will also unearth the seeds of a greater victory, a restoration of sight, a rebirth of knowing, and the gentle yet ferocious reawakening of the soul's original fire. The question is not whether darkness exists. It is whether we have the eyes to see its true nature and the will to step beyond it. As we move deeper into the labyrinth, we begin to sense that what we call Satan is less a singular creature and more a grand architecture, a swirling tapestry of ideas, energies, and unseen currents designed to tilt the soul away from its origin. It is not a crude evil of fangs and flames, but a sophisticated symphony of half-truths and almost rightness. It is the false dawn that mimics the true sunrise, the counterfeit river that quenches thirst but leaves the soul parched. At the heart of this hidden architecture lies a devastatingly simple principle: inversion. Everything that is pure is subtly twisted. Everything that is whole is carefully fractured. Darkness does not march forward openly. It creeps in through the perversion of light. Like a house built on a crooked foundation, reality itself becomes tilted when the soul consents, even unconsciously, to the great lie that it is separate, powerless, adrift. One of the core secrets lies in the understanding that satanic forces do not seek mere destruction. They seek ownership. They seduce the soul not with outright annihilation, but with offers of autonomy severed from source, promises of kingdoms fashioned from sand. The game is not about obliterating the soul, but about co-opting it, tempting it to crown itself as its own god, to grasp at hollow thrones and drink from poisoned wells. The adversary knows that true corruption is sweetest when it is self-chosen. Thus, a key pillar emerges: illusion of separation. Humanity has been meticulously taught to see itself as isolated, each being a lonely island adrift in a meaningless ocean. Connection, true connection, is anathema to the adversary's architecture because union is a force that exposes all falsity. Where there is authentic unity, deception cannot survive. The light shared between souls becomes an unstoppable wildfire that dissolves even the most ancient shadows. Another pillar stands beside it: seduction of knowledge without wisdom. From the earliest myths, the forbidden fruit was not simply the acquisition of knowledge, but the grasping of it without context, without heart. Knowledge divorced from wisdom becomes a weapon, a labyrinth of endless data points leading nowhere but into deeper fragmentation. In every age, the adversary cloaks itself in the authority of truth, while ensuring that this truth is incomplete, devoid of living spirit, hollowed out by pride and precision. The mind, once a luminous servant of the soul, becomes a tyrant, constructing elaborate towers of thought that rise only to collapse under their own dead weight. Then there is the subtle, corrosive principle of mirrored identity. Satan's fingerprints are especially clear in the crafting of false selves, the construction of identities based not on essence, but on the reflections of external approval, fear, status, or trauma. The soul, gazing into the mirror of the world, begins to forget that it was never the image it saw reflected back. It begins to worship the mask rather than the face, the costume rather than the actor. In doing so, the divine spark within becomes obscured, smothered beneath layers of imitation. Even in spiritual matters, the architecture of deception thrives. Religions and philosophies, meant to be ladders leading upward, are often inverted into prisons of dogma, hierarchies of control masquerading as sanctuaries of truth. In this way, the adversary weaves itself into the very systems designed to oppose it, blurring the lines, sowing confusion until seekers are trapped in endless circles, mistaking ritual for rebirth, obedience for transcendence. Yet, even amidst this vast network of illusions, there remains an undeniable truth. No matter how elaborate the deception, the soul is never truly severed from its source. The tether may be hidden, forgotten, wrapped in layers of grief and error, but it remains unbroken. The entire architecture of darkness depends on convincing the soul that the tether is gone, when in reality, it is as present as breath, as urgent as heartbeat, as luminous as the first dawn. There is a bitter paradox at work here. The adversary must constantly reinforce the illusion because the truth, once seen, instantly dissolves the trap. One crack in the facade, one glimpse beyond the mirror, and the entire edifice begins to crumble. Thus, distraction, noise, addiction, anger, despair. These are not random byproducts of a fallen world. They are engineered mechanisms to keep the soul from looking too deeply, from remembering too clearly. Every television screen glowing in the dark, every angry voice screaming across divides, every glittering lie promising fulfillment just beyond the next purchase, the next relationship, the next conquest. These are strands in the great tapestry of forgetting. And yet, every tear shed in honest sorrow, every moment of startling beauty, every act of reckless love, they too are cracks in the illusion, doorways back to the real. The dark and hidden secrets of Satan are not about cartoonish evil or simple villainy. They are about the subtle science of blindness, the crafting of a reality where chains are invisible and prisons feel like open fields. They are about stealing not just freedom, but the very memory of freedom. They are about turning the soul's sacred fire against itself. But to name these patterns is to begin the unraveling. To expose them is to plant seeds of revolution in the soil of the spirit. And so, we press onward, deeper into the symbolic stories that have tried, across countless centuries, to encode the way back home. Symbols that the adversary cannot erase because they are written not only in books and myths, but into the very stars above and the bones within. Symbols are the language of the soul. They move in ways that words cannot, planting seeds of understanding deep within the unconscious, where the adversary's reach is weaker, where the soul still dreams of its true nature. In the great and hidden war between remembrance and forgetting, symbols have always been the silent messengers, slipping past the guards of the mind to awaken something ancient, something fierce and luminous. To understand the dark and hidden secrets of Satan, we must listen not only to doctrine, but to the hidden stories, the myths that whisper louder than shouts. Consider the ancient image of the fallen star. It was never merely a meteor streaking across the heavens. It was the picture of brilliance untethered, of light torn from its center, burning bright for a moment before being swallowed by the void. The star that falls is the soul that, once knowing its place in the grand choir, decides to sing a solo so loud, so dazzling, that it forgets it was ever part of a greater song. In every fall, there is pride disguised as beauty, ambition clothed as destiny. Satan's secret, encoded in the fallen star, is not rebellion alone, but a rebellion that forgets why it ever sang. Another symbol moves alongside the fallen star, the mirror. In countless myths, the mirror is a gateway, a trap, a revelation. In the adversary's architecture, the mirror becomes a weapon, a tool by which the soul is hypnotized by its own reflection. Not merely vanity, but a subtler, deeper seduction. The belief that the reflection is the reality, that the image, the mask, the persona is all that there is. The mirror tells the soul, you are this name, this role, this wound, this triumph. And slowly, tenderly, the soul believes it. It becomes trapped in an echo, a loop of identity that hardens into a tomb. Yet deeper still flows the river of the labyrinth, the ancient, archetypal maze woven into the myths of every civilization. The labyrinth is the world built by the adversary, a world of endless corridors, each promising fulfillment, none leading home. In the center of the labyrinth sits not a monster, but an emptiness, a great silence where the soul, if it ever arrives, must choose to despair or to remember. To walk the labyrinth is the soul's great trial. Every false promise, every dead-end ideology, every shimmering yet hollow success is another corridor. The adversary does not need to drag the soul into chains. He only needs to ensure it keeps walking in circles. And what of the serpent, that ancient and misunderstood figure? The serpent is wisdom corrupted, knowledge unmoored from love. In the sacred, the serpent is transformation, the shedding of old skins. But in the adversary's hands, the serpent becomes a symbol of cunning, of knowledge wielded without heart, of evolution without purpose. It is the sly whisper that tells the soul it can ascend without remembering its roots, that it can conquer the heavens without ever bowing to the silent laws that birth the stars. Layer upon layer, these symbols form a secret map, not to defeat Satan by force, but to expose him by sight. For the adversary's true power is not in strength, but in secrecy. Once seen, the labyrinth begins to dissolve. Once recognized, the mirror's spell weakens. Once remembered, the fallen star rekindles its connection to the silent symphony it once abandoned. Even the sacred myths of resurrection, the phoenix rising from ashes, the stone rolled away from the tomb, are veiled lessons written for the soul that stumbles through the darkness. They are not just celebrations of hope, they are blueprints for escape. The ashes are the false self, the tomb is the labyrinth, and the resurrection is not a gift bestowed from without, but a battle won within. The moment when the soul ceases to believe the lies spun around it and remembers the undying light at its core. But the adversary has anticipated even this. For every true symbol, he crafts 1,000 counterfeits. New mirrors, new labyrinths, new serpents that promise wisdom but deliver chains. The modern world is flooded with such symbols, slick, hollow imitations of sacred truths, offered in songs, films, philosophies, politics, even in corrupted spiritualities. They echo just enough of the original to feel familiar, but their song leads only to deeper slumber. To walk among these illusions requires more than cleverness. It requires a different kind of seeing, a seeing from the heart, a perception that listens not just to the appearance of a thing, but to its essence. It is not enough to know the symbols intellectually. They must be lived, tasted, suffered through. Only by walking the labyrinth, facing the mirror, shedding the false skins, can the soul burn away the scaffolding of lies and step once again into the vast and terrifying freedom of the real. The hidden war is fought not with weapons of iron or words shouted across battlegrounds, but in the silent chambers of the heart. It is a war of memory against forgetting, of seeing against illusion, of love against the cold machinery of control. And every symbol understood, every story remembered, becomes another sort of light in the hand of the awakening soul. There are greater mysteries still, the secrets of the double helix, the hidden geometries of the soul's ascent, the ways in which even time itself has been twisted by the adversary's hand. But these are roads that open only when the heart is prepared to bear their weight. For now, we have walked through the first layers, glimpsed the first maps hidden in plain sight. The deeper the soul listens, the clearer the call becomes. To awaken is not merely to see the darkness, but to rise beyond it, to become once again a vessel through which the unbroken light of the source can sing. To see the hidden architecture is not enough. Vision, without embodiment, becomes just another illusion, one more corridor in the endless labyrinth of the mind. There comes a moment in every soul's journey where revelation must become revolution, where insight must bend its knee to action, and where the truths glimpsed in silence must be stitched into the fabric of daily life. The secrets of Satan are not academic curiosities nor mystical indulgences. They are blueprints for a false world, and to expose them is to risk everything by living differently within that world. Here, in this dense realm of flesh and systems and breath, the war is waged in the simplest gestures, in the choice to listen when anger would be easier, in the decision to forgive even when justice is withheld, in the refusal to wear masks that suffocate the spirit. The adversary does not fear the philosopher or the priest who speaks great truths from a stage. He fears the quiet soul who lives that truth in a world built to mock it. Every time a soul chooses presence over distraction, authenticity over performance, simplicity over spectacle, a ripple moves through the unseen realms. It may look like nothing, a breath, a pause, a moment of clarity in traffic, but in the hidden domain where Satan's influence weaves its net, these are detonations. They are cracks in the mirror, strikes against the illusion. And if enough cracks form, the light begins to pour in. The adversary's reach is seen most clearly in the normalization of noise. He thrives in overstimulation, feeds on it. In fact, our age is a kingdom of static, where the soul is rarely allowed to be silent long enough to remember its own voice. Thus, integration begins not with doing, but with undoing. With unlearning the constant chase, stepping back from the false thrones of relevance and productivity, and creating sacred space within the ordinary. A morning ritual, a silent walk, a phone turned off in favor of a child's gaze. These are portals, not just preferences. And yet, one must not become naive. The moment a soul begins to integrate truth into action, resistance awakens. Not necessarily in demonic roars, but in subtle discouragements. Sudden fatigue, misunderstandings with loved ones, anxieties that seem to come from nowhere. The adversary's architecture does not collapse quietly. It rattles, it resists. It sends messages through the subconscious, urging the soul to return to normal, to not make this harder than it needs to be. But the one who endures these tremors begins to realize they are signs of progress, not failure. Relationships, too, become arenas of transformation. The adversary seeks not just to twist individuals, but to fracture the bonds between them. He injects suspicion, fuels offense, distorts communication until love becomes labor. Therefore, one of the most radical acts of spiritual warfare is to preserve sacred connection, to see beyond the masks of fear and control that others wear, and to speak to their soul instead. Every time this is done, every time true presence meets true presence, another circuit of the dark grid shorts out. Even the systems we move through, economic, social, political, are not immune to transformation, though they often feel immovable. The adversary has embedded himself into the machinery of these structures, not to rule as a tyrant, but to lull as a whisperer, to use convenience as a leash, to wrap the illusion in comfort so tight we forget it's even there. To integrate truth here means questioning not only the obvious injustices, but the unseen costs of normalcy. What am I endorsing with my attention? Where does my money go while I sleep? Which rituals of this society require me to lie to myself? This kind of living, awake, aware, and aligned, is not for perfectionists. It is not about flawless execution. The adversary tempts with guilt as often as with pride. Integration does not demand purity. It demands honesty. The one who stumbles, but stumbles consciously, correcting their step with humility and reflection, is further along than the one who floats perfectly within the sleepwalk. Each moment becomes an altar, each decision a blade that cuts through fog. And perhaps most mysteriously, integration invites a kind of holy loneliness. As the soul begins to peel away from the noise, from the roles it once performed, from the false personas praised by the culture, a space opens. Friends may drift. Familiar pleasures may lose their taste. The soul grieves, not because it is failing, but because it is shedding. The husks fall away, and in their place, something ancient rises, not ecstasy, but clarity. Not safety, but sovereignty. Not applause, but the quiet joy of walking with the unseen whisper of the real. That whisper begins to speak more clearly. It does not command, but suggests. It nudges the soul toward courage, toward beauty, toward self-responsibility. It says, you were never meant to be a pawn in this game. You were always the spark behind the fire. That whisper is the thread leading out of the labyrinth, the remembrance that nothing, no system, no trauma, no darkness, is final. In this world, where the adversary's reach stretches into screens, contracts, traditions, and expectations, integration is not a single decision. It is 1,000 small ones. Each day, the soul must choose to see, to feel, to step forward when it would be easier to turn away. These are not acts of rebellion. They are acts of remembering. And in remembering, we begin to reclaim the story. In the end, the journey through these shadowed corridors does not leave us where we began. To expose the secrets of Satan is not to emerge victorious in the way the world often imagines, with banners raised and enemies defeated, but to emerge awake, eyes no longer dulled by illusion, heart no longer domesticated by fear. It is to remember that the darkness was never an enemy to be destroyed, but a mirror to be seen through. It is not conquest we seek, but clarity. Not dominance over evil, but sovereignty over our own sleep. The adversary, for all his cunning, for all the complexity of his latticework of illusions, possesses no true originality. He creates nothing. He only twists what already is. He casts shadows where light once stood. He reflects what was whole into fragments and convinces us that the pieces are all that remain. His kingdom is made of borrowed symbols, stolen meanings, counterfeit dreams. And when we see this clearly, not intellectually, but in the marrow of our being, his grip weakens, not because we've fought him, but because we've ceased to need him. For that is perhaps the final, hidden secret. Satan exists most powerfully in the parts of us that still crave the illusion. that still reach for control when surrender is what would set us free, that still cling to identities because the great I am beneath them feels too vast, too unmanageable. He lives in the hunger for certainty, for security, for identity sculpted in stone. And when the soul becomes willing to let go, not of all things, but of the need to own them, it slips quietly out of the adversary's web. This is the call, not merely to learn these truths, but to become them. Not to shout about evil in the streets, but to unearth the shadows within and transmute them into sight. To take the mirror and turn it into a window. To turn the labyrinth into a dance. To look at the serpent and say, I do not fear your poison, for I have tasted the real. This path is not about becoming righteous. It is about becoming whole. It is time to stop waging war against the shadows and start burning brighter than them. Light does not argue with darkness. It does not demand proof. It simply shines. And the more we shine, not performatively, but from the core, the more the false light is exposed. The adversary cannot stand in the presence of one who knows who they are, not because of arrogance, but because of remembrance. And remembrance is contagious. When one's soul awakens, others begin to stir. The grid of control, the net of illusion, cannot hold where two or more stand in truth together. The old bonds fray. The false hierarchies tilt. The game begins to collapse. And from the rubble of that collapse, something eternal begins to rise. Not a new world forced into being, but the original one unveiled, uncovered like an ancient city beneath centuries of sand. The soul, once reconnected, no longer searches for purpose. It is purpose. It moves not from fear or need, but from the effortless overflow of its own essence. This is what the adversary fears most, not rebellion, not resistance, but radiance. For radiance cannot be manipulated. It cannot be bought. It cannot be turned against itself. And so, dear traveler, you who have read these words and walked with me through the architecture of the shadow, now comes the silence after the storm. Now comes the pause where the question hangs in the air, not from me, but from the deepest part of you. Will you burn? Not in judgment, not in shame, but in the holy fire of transformation. Will you remember the flame that never went out? Will you stand, not as an opponent to darkness, but as its antidote? Will you live in such a way that every breath you take becomes a blow against the great forgetting? If so, then the secrets of Satan are no longer dangerous. They are no longer hidden. They become nothing more than tools, withered relics of an old game you no longer need to play. And you? You become the new myth, the living parable, the symbol that speaks to others without words. You become the one who walked through the labyrinth and came out with a flame in your hands, and eyes that see not just the world as it is, but as it was always meant to be. The adversary may still whisper, but the song within you is louder. And once the soul begins to sing again, no force in heaven or hell can silence it. You are not a prisoner. You never were. You simply forgot where the door was. Now you've seen it. Now you remember. Now you walk through.